Welcome back to Radio Entrepreneurs. I'm Jonathan Freedman, and our next guest needs no introduction, Marc Z with the Marc Z Moment. Welcome today to Radio Entrepreneurs.
John, great to be here, and always a lot of fun hanging out on the show with you and discussing important topics to our listeners in a summer of hopefully a lot of fun and success for our listeners.
That sounds great. I know you're always bringing timely and topical, and today you want to talk about that oft desired vacation and how it may impact your job search and the hiring of candidates. So, what's on your mind?
So, what I thought I would talk about is a subject that everybody wishes for, which is taking a vacation, but taking a vacation uninterrupted where they can focus and enjoy the vacation. And what a lot of employers had typically in the past been concerned about, well, we have a need. If a candidate's taking a vacation or a person we're thinking about hiring, then maybe we shouldn't hire that person. Let's go with somebody who is available immediately. And the same thing with the candidate. Well, if I have a vacation coming up, I'm not going to look at a certain opportunity because I have a vacation coming up. And that has changed a lot over the years. First of all, we're in a time where it's so important to take a break, to unplug, to focus on yourself, and hopefully tuning out to a lot of the stress we have in our jobs today. But the other thing is you can still look at opportunities as a candidate because employers will do workarounds for your vacation. We just had somebody that we placed that started for a week, and then they had a pre-planned vacation the following week. And it was important for the client to have the person start, get properly trained, and then come back, because just in terms of the logistics with the training, then come back and maybe have more training or maybe be able to meet with key people on the team for other aspects of the job and getting some training or getting some quality experience with that group. But at the same time, not lose out on that role because that person had a planned vacation. And I think for employers are willing to do the workaround. Employers are now changing that strategy because they want to find the best talented people in a market where you have a limited pool of talented people in a lot of different areas.
No, it's interesting you bring that up because obviously bringing somebody into a full-time role and bringing somebody on board for a position is not a short-term fix, right? Most people who are looking for a position and most employers who are hiring are looking for a long-term. So to take that long view, I think makes sense that in the grand scheme of things, whether you're talking about a week or two delay or a week or two pause, seems to me to be a short-sighted view of a long-term, solution. And so I think your suggestions are good ones. I think, is a business serious about a candidate or a firm if they look at them and say, well, that person has a planned vacation? I mean, it's always fascinating to me when somebody says, well, we're not going to take that person because they have a vacation planned, as if people plan their vacations the day before it happens. These are
Right.
very often long-term plans. And I think respecting that and understanding that should say something about the situation that you're stepping into, boundaries, personal time, things of that nature. Is that not a red flag sometimes for people to say, well, maybe it's not a compatible environment with my beliefs?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It has to be right also for both parties. So the timing might not be good. The understanding of the person's situation might not be good for the employer or the employee. But those are factors that if I'm an employee and an employer is making that a determining factor, then that's definitely something that I'm going to consider a red flag.
Yeah, and it would seem to me, in today's day and age that, as you said, vacations are important, having downtime is important. If in an ideal world you can structure it in your transition, great, but that doesn't always work out. People put deposits down, people have airfares booked,
Right.
things booked, and you can't always pivot to the last minute just because, an opportunity has presented itself. So
Correct.
I guess the question that comes to mind is, I think you stated it, don't take the foot off the gas and continue the process of moving forward. How do you broach that subject? Is that late in the process when they start, the offer has already come and we're talking about start dates?
So first of all, just to get back to your original point, if that's the first point of understanding between a prospective employer and employee about whether or not they'll do a workaround for somebody's vacation, then that obviously can be a red flag for both parties. And in terms of an employer, if an employee is not open to looking at something, if they have a pre-planned vacation and they let that prospective employer know, and that all of a sudden that prospective employer is saying, well, in that case, we're not going to move forward, that does says something about the employer, and the employer should consider that. But I would say, in terms of with the prospective employee, when they're interviewing, it's not something that you would discuss in the very beginning, because I think for a couple of reasons. One is that it's a big presumption that you're coming in and saying, by the way, I have this vacation. So if you're considering me for a job, this is my situation, because that will come across as very presumptuous.
Right.
So I would say probably when it gets serious down the point of the interview process, then the prospective employee could bring that up if they say, well, what's your timetable? Because that's when it usually comes up. What is your timetable? And then the person could say, well, I could definitely start, which is what's happened in situations that we've been working on lately. I could definitely start on X date. I do have a pre-planned vacation, but then I would be able to come right back. Or I could start after that, and I could take it unpaid, or I could borrow time. I'm negotiable on that. So usually that comes up as it gets to the final process, when somebody's available in terms of timing, start date, that type of thing. Because then the employer can make a decision, when can this person start? And the employee can say, well, if they can't have me start at this time or won't wait for me, then I'm not interested. So it gets down to a certain point, but not at the very beginning.
Well, I
And
think
and
that's
it's
all great. Great advice. And what you're suggesting is don't pull back on your opportunities, pursue the opportunities. I guess the only concern is, can it be construed as I was holding back on relevant information? But I think to your point is, you haven't gotten an offer yet, so it might not be relevant.
that's the
So why?
that's the balance. And it usually comes in the end. Like, for example, at the very end, okay, well, the employer's ready to make an offer, and then the prospective employee said, I just wanted to say, and I want to be upfront, here's my situation. And I think as the conversation comes, it depends, is it going to be later in the process, or is it going to be after an offer is made? That's sometimes when it's done too. But it would not be done early in the process. It would be done at the later stages for the employer to make a decision based on the information they now have. Because if the employer makes an offer, then the employer wants to have all the information in terms of when the person could start.
Right. And I think
And
the
then
simple
the
thought.
employer would, I'm sorry?
Right. I was going to say the simple comeback at that point, if the response is, well, why didn't you tell me about this? The simple answer is, I didn't want to be presumptuous that I was getting a role. Now that we're talking about the role and I'm in it, I want to disclose all information. So I think you can position it as, not a need to know basis, but, at the appropriate time.
Right. I mean, you want to be fair to both parties. Employers have a time clock where they need a position filled, and sometimes it's because certain person is leaving and they want training that this person could provide. The person is leaving and they're in a key role that needs to be filled as soon as possible because of the urgency and the responsibilities of the role. So the employer does need to know that information at a certain point in time. But as you said, it's presumptuous if all of a sudden you're beginning a first interview and saying, by the way, if you're looking for a start date of 2 weeks from today, I'm not available because I have a vacation. So it's for both parties.
You might as well add to that, and I'm not available on Fridays, Mondays, and every second Wednesday.
Correct, correct,
Yeah.
correct. So everything's on the table then. So I think, as you said, not think, I know that it has to be done in terms of a timing, what's right for the prospective employer, and where the employee feels comfortable to let that employer know, here's my situation. And that's when it usually happens later in the process. And that's a balancing act for both of them to see, okay, for the prospective employee, is this an employer and is this a position that's important enough for me to begin a job at this point? Now, we've had situations where the employer said, look, I'm down between two candidates. This candidate can start in 2 weeks. Your candidate can't start for 3.5 weeks. We really need this position filled. These can be tiebreaker situations. So it is a balance that employers have to make And then in some cases we've had cases where we've gone back to the candidate, and the candidate said, you know what, this vacation can be pushed for another month. So I would like this position, and they changed their vacation. So bottom
Like,
line is, it's something that both the employer, prospective employers and employees need to look at, but don't give up on a vacation because the employer is open in most cases to accommodate your schedule, and employers don't give up on a candidate, even if it's a slight inconvenience, because you could have a very talented person join you.
always good advice. And I think, the other piece I'd add to it, communication. Communication is key, and making sure that you're having open dialogue and having those conversations at the appropriate time.
Right, right.
Mark, is always great information. If people want to talk to you more about placements, or either from the employer side or from the employee perspective, what's the best way for them to reach out to you?
Well, John, first of all, it's been a pleasure as always. Please tell our listeners to Google Marc Z, MARC, and the letter Z, and we'll come right up. Go on our wonderful Entrepreneurs website, radioentrepreneurs.com, marczlegal.com, marczlegal.com, and 617-338-1300.
Fantastic. This has been a Marc Z Moment with Marc Zwetchenbaum of Marc Z Legal Staffing, and we'll be right back on another segment, Radio Entrepreneurs.